Hey church, Pastor Brandon here, and I'm so happy that you guys are joining us today. I hope that you're at home chilling in your PJs with your slippers on, you're relaxing, you're enjoying yourself, because you guys have worked so hard this year in getting the church to where it is. So I am so excited. In fact, we're able to do this right now. We're able to do this virtual experience that we weren't able to do before because of you guys, because you guys have come in and you've served in all the different areas, and we've been able to build this thing where we have a camera team and a production team that's able to do that. So I'm grateful for you guys. I'm grateful for them because they're here helping me do this right now. So I'm super, super excited. I want to remind you that I just want to say thank you for your generosity. We're coming up on the end of year giving here. This is going to be the last message of 2023. So I just want to say thank you for all the impact that you've done in this city in 2023. It was absolutely amazing. And a quick administrative note, keep your eye out for your email inbox and then your actual mailbox. You should be getting your giving letters coming up next month, okay? So I just want to let you guys know that because I'm going to start getting emails about it, and I want to make sure that you guys are informed. So with that, I want to get into the message today, and just play with me along if you can while you're at home. How many of you guys at home, how many of you guys are competitors, right? I mean, I'm just going to go ahead and raise my hand because I am for sure a competitor. I love to win. I don't like to lose. There are certain times where I feel like I can lose. I step in and I feel like I'm okay losing, and there's moments like that. But then there's other moments that I'm not okay losing, and those are actually more common than not. A few years ago, I started a journey with training jiu-jitsu. And in the Marine Corps, I had some background in ground grappling and things like that, but I wasn't a wrestler in high school. I didn't have any background in it. So then I got on the mats in jiu-jitsu, and let me tell you, I got my butt whooped. I didn't just get my butt whooped. I got my butt whooped consistently, day after day after day after day. I went in and I would consistently lose. And being a competitor, I don't like to lose. It was so hard. And what's so funny is I went in every week, I went in every day thinking the win for me was if I tapped the other person out, because logically that's what it means to win in jiu-jitsu. That's at least what I was thinking. If I tapped them out, then I won, they lost. It was easy for me, right? Like that was my win. But over time, over the last 2 years, I've come to realize that the win in jiu-jitsu for me is actually not necessarily always winning the match, because I still go up against blue belts and purple belts and brown belts and black belts that just absolutely crush me. But I don't get as frustrated or as angry about it anymore, because I've learned that the win is actually not always to get the tap. The win is kind of what it's doing on the inside of me. It's teaching me something about myself. I'm learning how to be more physically fit, and I'm learning how to handle myself physically. The win is different. And see, I started the journey with the wrong win. I started the journey thinking that I had to win every single match that I stepped into. But then over time, I realized that actually wasn't helpful at all. And now, once I defined that new win, I realized something. I got better at jiu-jitsu, and I started to make new friends. I started to have a different community. God gave me interesting ways that I could share my faith in ways that I never thought possible. All because I simply shifted my mindset and I redefined the win and what it means to be on the ground. Because defining the win is important. It's one of the most important things you could ever do. And here's what I know about you, even though I'm not sure who you're sitting at home with, I'm not sure who you're enjoying this message with, and what you're drinking with your morning coffee this morning, but I can tell you this about you. You don't want to lose in life, do you? You don't want to lose in life. In fact, you never set out. I've never met one person that sets out and says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out and lose today. I'm going to go out and make bad decisions in my business. I'm going to make bad decisions in my marriage. You know what? I don't care, and I'm just going to make bad decisions with my kids. I've never met that person. But I have met tons of people who go out and make those bad decisions. But they make those bad decisions, and it's not because they're bad people or they don't care. It's simply because they haven't defined what winning looks like in their life. They don't know where the goal line is. To use a football analogy, since it's Sunday, and in fact, I believe we're going to have some bowl games today and again tomorrow, in fact, that it's like playing the game of football, but never knowing where the goal line was. I mean, imagine if all the painted lines on the football field were completely gone, and you just had green field going for days and days and days, right? And then they said, play the game of football. The first thing you do when you play a game of football in a big empty field is, what do? You set the goal line. You determine, okay, well, how do we know when we've gotten there? Like, where is the place that's the place? Like, where's the win? Where's the goal line at? And for many of us, it doesn't translate to our life. It would be ridiculous to play a football game that way. It would be ridiculous to play a soccer game without an actual goal. Can you imagine playing soccer without a goal? I mean, you would just kind of, where do you place the goalie? I don't know, somewhere on the field. Where at? I don't know. We don't know where the goal is. Well, that's not really helpful, and you can't play a game like that. In fact, defining the win, as it relates to your life, defining the win is one of the most important things you can and one of the most important things that you should do. And I'm going to give you a couple demonstrations of that. Apple, when they started way, way back in the day when Steve Jobs came back from Pixar, and they were losing. Apple was not in a good position. In fact, they were about to be sold. Steve Wozniak already left. Like, they didn't have a lot of promise at all. But Steve Jobs comes back in. And when he comes back in, he realized that the Apple Computer Company was doing so many different things. They were running in all sorts of different directions, but they had no goal line. They had no win. They didn't know when they had actually arrived somewhere. They didn't know when they've achieved the goal. So he gathers his team around. If you haven't read the book, you should read the book about Steve Jobs. He gathers his team around, and he says this, and this became the one goal, the vision statement, the mission statement for Apple Computers. In fact, it's affected your life so much today. And the win was that we're going to make, imagine this, sitting around at a table with all of his leaders. He says, we're going to make easy to use computers. He takes all the chaos, and I don't know where the win is. I don't know what winning looks like. He settles it all down. He says, hey, if we make easy to use computers, we've made it, and we've made it to the goal line. If we make easy to use computers, we have achieved our goal. We know what the win is, and we're pursuing the win. And see, there's tangible ways you could do this in your relationships too, and in your life. See, Leah and I have wins defined in our life. We have a goal line. We have a goal line specifically in two areas, in parenting and in our marriage. In parenting, we have a goal line. Our goal is we want to have adult relationships with our kids. That's our goal. We want to have adult relationship with our kids. So that means that we have to raise good kids that we actually want to be in a relationship with. And that means that we have to parent them in such a way that the relationship outlasts the 5-year-old. It outlasts the 10-year-old. It outlasts the teenager to where they're 20 and 30 and 40 and hopefully 50, that we would be able to have these relationships with them as adults. That's our win, and it informs decisions we make. It informs punishments that we decide to take on. It informs the way we communicate with them. Why? Because our goal, it's very simple, our goal is to have an adult relationship with our kids. That means we have to raise them the right way, and that means we have to respect them as humans and spend so much time and energy prioritizing those relationships. As it relates to our marriage, we have a goal there too. And our goal for our marriage is that we want to be married to each other after the kids have left the house. That we want to be married to each other after the kids have left the house. Because many of you know, some of you are in this season right now, and you got a bunch of little kids running around, and you've got practice upon practice, and you've got school drop off, and you got school pick up, and then you've got 2 jobs happening. You're at work, and she's at work, or he's at work, and you guys are all over the place, right? And you've got dance, and then you got cheerleading, then you got football, and you got jujitsu, and then you got wrestling, right? You're all over the place, not to mention the time you said yes to serve on the PTO, or the time that you said yes, you'll coach the football team, or the time that you said yes, you'll volunteer at the church, right? Or yes, you'll be part of this team. You're busy, and you probably don't recognize it, but you've probably gone quite a few times, quite a few days, without having a meaningful conversation with your spouse. And over time, it's so easy to let that become the norm. And before you know it, this is just truth of it, and we're gonna cover more of this as we get into a series in February called The Vow. Really looking forward to that series as we talk about relationships. But what happens is you begin to drift apart. And you don't mean to, and it's not on purpose, and surely you love her still, and surely he loves you still, but what happens is over the next 10, 15 years as you're raising your kids, you two begin to drift apart, and you're drifting apart because you're still doing everything you need to do, she's still doing everything she needs to do, and you two are growing, except you're growing in the opposite direction. You're not growing together. And that's why our goal line is that we want to have a relationship and we want to be married. We want to be married after the kids have moved out. So that means, and that informs the way that we live our life now. That means there are times that her and I just spend time together. There's times that even though we've had a long day, even though we're both exhausted, and maybe I want to go play the PlayStation, or I want to go watch the football game, or she wants to watch a TV series, or she wants to read a book, that we sit down and we say, hey, we have not spent time together the way that we normally do. So we sit down and we watch a TV show together. Or maybe we sit down and determine that we need to go out to dinner. We haven't gone out to dinner for a long time. It's doing things like that that are going to help and ensure to us that we reach that goal line. Because when the goal is set and the line is determined, I know where the win is. If I know where it is, I can make better decisions getting there. And if I can make better decisions getting there, my life will be better. Now, winning and achieving something is not often thought of when it comes to the Christian walk and the Christian life. A lot of times we're viewed, as Christians are weak. We're not supposed to win. It's not important. You shouldn't focus on things like that. But I'm going to make the argument here in just a second that it's not true. That you actually should be focused on winning in your life, and you should be focused on being successful in your life in the right areas. But you should be focused on those things. The Apostle Paul actually does it for us. I don't even have to make that convincing of an argument because he actually makes a very convincing argument in his letter to the church in Corinth. Now remember, the Apostle Paul, he was a Christian killer, okay? The Apostle Paul says in Acts that he approved the stoning of Stephen. So when Stephen, the church's first martyr, when the Sanhedrin and they spin up all of the crowd to basically murder Stephen and stone him to death in the middle of the street, the Apostle Paul, it's recorded, Luke records for us in Acts, the Apostle Paul sits up and says, I approve of that. The Apostle Paul approved of the killing of Christians well before he was a follower of Christ. Then he has an amazing moment with the Lord Jesus, who appears and knocks him off his horse, blows his mind, and then he's got to go to this other person, and he's got to pray for him, and the scales fall off his eyes. It's a big, long story. You should read it. It starts in Acts chapter 9. You should read it. We're going to do another series on Acts this year, so I'm looking forward to that. But the Apostle Paul was not a good person, at least not initially. But then over time, Jesus worked on his heart and he became the serial church planter. And as he became the serial church planter, one of the churches he planted was the church in Corinth. And the church in Corinth was going through some massive trouble and some big, big problems. The Corinthian church, the church in Corinth, the city was a massive port city. So that means that people were in and out all the time. Big, big, big pagan temple presence, okay? And when the early believers started following Jesus, they tried to intermix the pagan religions too. And in doing so caused actually a lot of problems because things didn't make sense. They weren't honoring the Lord's Supper, and they were worshiping angels too. And it was a weird spot where Paul and the other apostles had to write all these letters and no, you guys, come on, stop it. Stop doing that, right? But in this particular section here in the church in Corinth, he goes on to talk about how dangerous it is to have a mindset of things aren't important. I shouldn't be pursuing the win. Paul says, no. There is an issue with that. There is an issue with that type of life. And once Paul kind of talks about these things, he addresses the issues with sin, he addresses the issues of mixing the pagan life and stuff. He then shifts to say, okay, now this is how you should live your life. Okay, leave that behind. Okay, we're not bringing the worship of Zeus and Jupiter and all the, we're not bringing any of that. So just leave that there. But we're going to live a different way. We're going to live a different way. And it's in that section in 1 Corinthians, so the first letter to the church in Corinth, there's two of them, so find the one that has a 1 before it. So 1 Corinthians chapter 9, we're going to start in verse 19. The Apostle Paul is trying to teach them something. So he's going to say a few things that maybe don't make sense at first, but I'm going to explain it, and then we'll see where we get our instruction from. The apostle writes this, he says, though I am free, and I belong to no one. He's making the point that all of the followers in the church in Corinth, they were like, oh, well, I'm free. I'm a free man. I'm not a slave. And if I'm free, then I can do whatever I want. There's no reason that I should deny myself anything. And the apostle goes, okay, I know that that's what you think. I know that sounds like a good idea, but it's not. It's not a good idea at all. He says, though I am free and I belong to no one, I'm a master or I have no master. He says, I have made myself a slave to everyone. What do you mean, made yourself a slave to everyone? He continues, he says, to win as many as possible. Now listen to what he says next. And to the Jews, I became like a Jew, to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law. And then he gives a little preface. He says, though I myself am not under the law. He says, so as to win those under the law. He's talking about winning them to Christ. He says, to those not having the law, so the Gentiles, people who were non-Jewish believers, or non-Jewish people, he said, I became like one not having the law. He continues to give a little bit of background about himself. He says, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law. We'll go into that in just a second. So as to win those not having the law. And it's like, okay, wait a minute. Law, not law, not law. Paul says basically this. Look, if they were followers of the Old Testament, I made sure that I lived my life in such a way that, hey, there was no recourse against me and that I would earn their trust and that they would follow Jesus because I lived my life that way. And for those who weren't under the law, not under the Old Testament, then, hey, I just behaved normally to them, although I didn't give in to their sins. I didn't do any of that, but I lived as though somebody that didn't have the law. I ate the food that they ate, and there was no problem. To the Jews, I didn't eat the kosher food. I followed the kosher diet. To the Gentiles, I kind of did the other thing. So, hey, this is Paul's point, I did whatever it took to win those for Christ. I did whatever it took to win those for Christ. He says, that's my goal. My goal, the Apostle Paul says, is simply this. I want to win people to Jesus. His goal was very simple. He wanted to win people to Jesus. And now this section here, he says that he is under Christ's law. Well, Christ's law is actually the greatest commandment. It's the one that he talks about back in Matthew, and then he expands upon in the book of John. He talks about in Matthew and Luke and in Mark. But if you forgot it, it's kind of like our mantra around here. We say it all the time. When Jesus was approached by a lawyer, the lawyer asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says the greatest commandment, the law of Christ, is to love God and to love people. Paul says, I'm still under that law. I'm not under the Old Testament law, but I'm under that new law. I'm under that law, which if you're a New Testament believer, which is probably any of you guys watching this video right now, that means that's your law. That's the law you're under. You're not under the law of the Old Testament. You're actually under Christ's law, which is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And if that gets too difficult, if you ever forget what it means to love people, Jesus goes on in John and he says, love the way that I've loved you. If you ever get confused, if you ever can't understand it, or you ever forget what it means to love people, Jesus says, just do what I've done for you. And you can't ever go wrong there. So the apostle draws on all of that, and he says, look, I'm bound by the law of Christ, and my goal in life, my purpose for being here, my win is simply this: I want to win people to Jesus. He continues in verse 22. He says, to the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things. This is so powerful. I've become all things to all people, so that by all means I might save some. Now, this is a great blueprint to evangelize. This is a phenomenal blueprint to evangelize. Notice the Apostle Paul's not violating any of his morals or any of the things that he has and that he holds as convictions. But what he's saying is the things that aren't important, I let those fall to the wayside. And why did I do that? Because Paul says, I wanted to win those to Christ. And that means that I set some of the things aside that were non-essentials to me. I just kind of put them to the side. Why? Because it's not important, and I want to win as many as possible. And he says, I'm not going to win all of them, but it's worth it if I might save some. Now, let me pause for just a second here. Imagine what would happen if the church today took that attitude. If the church today took the attitude of, look, I'm going to become weak to win the weak. I'm going to become like the Jew to win the Jew. I'm going to become like the Gentile to win the Gentile. I'm not going to compromise on my morals. I'm governed by the law of Christ, so I have a foundation, I have an anchor, I have that set in place. But what would happen for the church today if the church actually began thinking and prioritizing those outside the walls, rather than just focused on who's in the walls that agrees like us and thinks like us and behaves like us? Imagine what would happen if that actually happened to a church. I think it would change the world. In fact, it did. In Paul's day and age, the church changed everything because they took this attitude and this mentality outside of their gathering and took it from his letters and applied it to their lives. More on that in just a second. Paul continues in verse 23. He says, I do all this. So I put up with all this. I make all of these concessions. I make all these adjustments in my life. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Then he says this, do you not know? To which we all know what he's about to say next. That in a race, all the runners run. Of course, it's a race. All the runners run, Paul. We're not shocked by that. He says, well, hold on. Don't you know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Don't you know that? It's like, of course we know that, Paul. Of course. And then he says, okay, then you are to run in such a way as to get the prize. Pause. Two things here. One, if you don't recognize it, but you are in a race. You're in a race of two things. One, you're in a race to win people for Jesus. That's true. If you're a follower of Jesus, guess what? You entered into the race. You made it. You qualified. I'm so proud of you. But you also are in a race of life yourself. And Paul says, look, when you go in life, that you should run in such a way as to win the race. That doesn't mean you just go through life at all willy-nilly. That doesn't mean you just say, oh, it's just kind of not important, not a big deal at all here. Paul says that you are to live your life or run your race as if you have purpose. Because you do. You have a purpose. God put you here for a reason. And he puts you here on purpose for a purpose. See, he doesn't make accidents. God doesn't make accidents, and he doesn't make mistakes. You're at that job for a reason. You're in that relationship for a reason. You've got that friendship for a reason. You've been called to the area of the church for a reason. He doesn't make mistakes. You have a purpose. And the apostle says, look, if you're running the race to which any of those things qualify as part of the race, if you're running the race, he says, then run as if you're to win something. Meaning, infuse a little bit of urgency into your life. Infuse a little bit of urgency into what you do at work. Infuse a little bit of urgency into what you do at the church. When you spend time with your kids, when you spend time with your wife, when you spend time with your husband, infuse a little bit of urgency into that. And now here's the thing, because for many of us, we lack urgency. We lack urgency in life. And it's easy to do a race. Because in a race, you always know where you stand. Isn't that true? I mean, come on. You guys ran track before. When you're running track, you always know where you are in the rung. Because I'm here, he's there. If I cross the finish line before him, I win. If I don't, he wins. And then the entire race around the track, guess what? You know what place you're in. If there's nobody in front of you, you're in first place. If they all in front of you, you in last place, right? You know where you are in a race. But in life, it's not that easy, is it? In life, it's just not that easy. Because if we look to our left and to our right, we're going to compare ourselves to people who have a different purpose than us. We're going to compare ourselves to people who aren't made the way we are. So looking to the left lane or looking to the right lane is not beneficial here. So then the question becomes, what do we do? And, well, I think the apostle already gave us that answer. He says, run in such a way as to get the prize. Because there's a prize. There is a prize. Live life, he says, as if there is a goal line, as if there is a finish line. Because there's going to be there's a real payoff in the end, which Paul implies there is a real payoff. If you're a follower of Jesus, the payoff is building his kingdom. That's what we're pursuing. That's what we're going after. That's what he's called us to do. But there's other areas of your life that benefit when you define the win also. As it relates to your family, your work, and your spiritual life will be better if you define the win. And, listen to me, and if you run as if there's actually a prize. But if you just go through life meandering about, if you just go through life going through the motions, if you go through your walk with Jesus just going through the motions, you're not going to be any closer to him today than you were 10 years ago. The same is true for your relationship with your husband. If you aren't trying to make it better and you're not pursuing it, it's not going to be any better than it was 10 years ago. You've got to pursue it. You've got to set a win. You've got to run the race and add some urgency to the race. But here, Paul actually explains why this is so important in just a second. In verse 25, he says, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training, and they do it to get a crown that will not last. Now, when he says go into the games, there were the gladiator games is what he's talking about. He's talking about the games in Greece. And when the games in Greece, they were very aware. Everybody knew what he's talking about. And he says when those athletes, the boxing, the wrestling, the track, all those different games that they did in the games in Greece, they would go into strict training. It wasn't something that they just kind of threw together, they decided they were going to do. They went into strict training. And he says they do it to get a crown that will not last. And the crown that he's talking about is called a laurel crown. But it eventually would wither because it's temporary. So they go into all this training, put all this time and energy into it, put all this effort into it, and they would get a crown that doesn't last and it withers. And you've met people that do that in this world too, huh? You've met people and you've seen people compete for a crown that just withers. You've seen people prioritize the wrong things. You've seen people set the goal of making the most money, and then when they got there, that crown withered. You have friends who've worked so hard on building the biggest business and they got the crown, but it withered. You have friends who spend all their time gaining the most influence, but guess what? That crown withered. You have friends who spent all their time ensuring their kids were doing exactly what they said the whole time in their house, and now they have no relationship with them as their adults. That crown had begun to wither. You've met those people. They live as though there is nothing to this life but this life. And it's about what you get here, including the rewards, and then after that, nothing else matters. But again, we know that's not true. And they go into strict training, to use Paul's words. They work hard, they bust their butts, they put time and energy into it, they pour themselves into it, but they don't pour themselves into their family, they don't pour themselves into their relationships, they don't pour themselves into their relationship with their Heavenly Father, they don't pour themselves into any of those things. They do it all for the temporary crown, Paul says, the crown that withers. And you have seen these people, and I know that you don't want to be them people, do you? You've seen them, but you don't want to be them. Maybe you want what they have financially. Maybe you want what they had with their kids. Maybe you wanted some of it at some point in your life. But now that you've seen the crown on their head that's withered, you don't want to do that. Paul says they do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. The work we do, the time we spend here, the energy we spend here, the work we do in our families, in our jobs, in our relationships, that work, Paul says, when done the right way with the right goal set in mind, Paul says that work is eternal. That work is eternal, and it lasts forever. Why is that? Because you're building the kingdom of heaven, not the kingdom of man. See, all the other examples I use, those individuals are building the kingdom of man. Temporary. The crown will wither. But what we do and what we strive to do is to build the kingdom of God. And that goes forever, for eternity. That means we are winning new people to Jesus. Not only that, that means we are building one another up, loving God and loving people, the law of Christ. That's the great law in the kingdom of heaven. So when that informs our life, our goal line changes. When that informs our life, our win should change. Paul says this, therefore, because of that, I've seen it, you've seen it, we have an eternal crown that we're pursuing. He says, therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. He says this, no, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified from the prize. The point is this, that Paul says, I make uncomfortable decisions right now. I become all things to all people so that I may win some. That's what he said. I make uncomfortable decisions right now so that I could have the crown in eternity later. I make decisions right now, Paul says, that have eternal consequences, forever consequences. I make decisions right now, Paul says, that will break generational curses, that will break family trauma, that will spread the good news of Jesus. I make decisions now with the end in mind. And friends, I think you should do the same. I think that we make too many decisions without the end in mind. I think we make parenting decisions. I think we make relationship decisions. I think we make job decisions, life decisions without ever thinking of kingdom impact and without ever thinking of eternal return on investment. We're just not interested in it. We're just one thing right after the other. But we should make decisions that will break those generational curses, that will combat trauma, that will stop these things that we are experiencing in our lives, that will spread the good news of Jesus. That we should make decisions with the end in mind. And here's the rub. Paul does a great job of bringing it all front and center to us, and he does a great job of telling us why we need to prioritize it, why we need to do it. But there's a rub. There's a rub here. Do you really want to do it? Do you really want to set those goal lines in your life and then say and pursue them? Do you really want to have that relationship with your kids? Because if you do, that means there's decisions that are hard right now that you're going to have to make. If you want to have a relationship with your husband after the kids move out, that means you're going to have to make decisions right now that are uncomfortable. If you want to build that long-term business that's not just making money, but actually helping people in the city, then that means you're going to have to make decisions right now that are uncomfortable. And that means that you aren't just going to get away with just making another dollar. It means that there's going to be times in your life when it comes down to getting that job, that dream job, the one you've wanted, the one you've spent so much time on, the one that you know will make a kingdom impact. That means you're going to have to make decisions right now that are uncomfortable. So the question that I ask is, do you really want to do it? Because it's not easy. I mean, Paul, up to this point, he in his life doing this, okay, becoming all things to all people so that he might win some, got him shipwrecked, got him beaten, got him stoned, not recreationally, got him slandered, got him accused. He lost friends. Why? All because he made the uncomfortable decisions because he had a goal in mind. He lived his life in such a way that he pursued the goal. He pursued a better way, not an easier way. And for some of us, we've spent too long picking the easy way. And our life shows that, doesn't it? That if we look at what kind of the life we've built and the things we've done, the relationship with God we have, the relationship we have in our marriage, the relationship with our children, the type of job we have, our relationships in our job, right? We look at all those things and we can sit back and go, yeah, you know what? I've just kind of, when he said boxer beating the air, that was me, right? Like boxer beating the air, that was some of us that have, sitting at home or listening in the car right now. Maybe that describes you. So if that does describe you, now's your chance. It's been brought to your attention. It's been highlighted. You don't have to do it anymore. You can simply stop. And you can set a goal. And then you can start making decisions now. Uncomfortable sometimes. Uncomfortable decisions now. Uncomfortable decisions financially to set yourself up for success in the future. Uncomfortable decisions now in your marriage to set yourself up for success in the future. You can begin making those things right now. But you got to decide that you want it. So you guys are super smart. You guys that are watching at home and listening to this and watching it wherever you are, you're super smart. I know you are because you go to our church. And if you don't go to our church, you're checking us out, which means you're even smarter than the average bear out there, okay? So I know you can handle these two application points that I have, okay? I normally only do one, but I think this one's one of those messages that I need to do two. The first application point is I want you to define your personal finish line. Your personal finish line. What does it mean to win for you? For me, I told you some of mine personally. That's what it means to win in my life. When I get to that point in my life, hey, I've won if I have a relationship with my kids and I still want to be married to my wife. I've won. Those are areas that I win. So I want you to go home and I want you to define, lucky you, you're already home. I want you to define your personal finish line. Define it. Don't just think about it now. Define it and write it down. What is it that you want to do, that's your goal line. That's pursuing. Because once you figured it out, it informs all the other decisions in your life. And let's just do it by like just the year. So let's take 2024. We're about to wrap up 2023 right now, and we're going into 2024 tomorrow, okay? So let's just wrap it up, and let's just think that year, just 2024. What do you want your relationship with God to look like? How do you want your relationships in your family to look? And then how do you want your job to look? If you can set finish lines in those areas of your life, you're going to be better for it. If you can set finish lines in those areas of your life, you are going to live this year better than you did this past year. Now, the second one, we have to go to Jesus' words for me to pull the application out of it. Jesus actually gave us marching orders before he left, before he was taken back up to heaven. You remember what they are? He said this in Matthew chapter 28. He said, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." So if you're a Jesus follower, this is just for the Jesus follower. So if you're not a Jesus follower, you can just kind of hang in, tune in there. I think this is good stuff so far, practical for you, super practical if you're a follower of Jesus. But this is specifically for us. If you're a follower of Jesus, this applies to you. If you're a follower of Jesus, this should be one of your goal lines. This should be a finish line for you, that you should focus and strive and decide that you want to make disciples. Now, that can look like all sorts of things. That could look like one person, you just want to win one person to faith this year. That could look like you want to win 5 people to faith. That could look like you just want to help somebody who's a baby Christian go a little bit deeper in their faith. I don't know what it is for you, but I'm going to challenge you with this. So our first action point was set a personal finish line, right? Set a personal finish line. Our second action point is this: decide who you're going to pour into this year. Because if this life was all about you, then this life wouldn't be a reflection of Jesus. That we better ourselves, and we definitely pursue things to make our relationship with God tighter, and we pursue things to get better at our jobs and be better husbands and wives and dads and moms and workers and co-workers and managers and all these things, and students. Sure, we do all that, but it is not the end. That we are called to pour into other people and develop other people. So who, define it, figure it out. You've got time. Okay, I know I'm doing this the last Sunday, and you're probably mad, Brandon, couldn't you have done it the Sunday before last night? I'm sorry. You still got a little bit, okay? Take this next couple days, okay? It's 2024. Take these next couple days, maybe even take the 21 days of prayer and fasting, and figure out what your finish line is, and figure out who you're going to pour into this year. Because you're part of God's plan. You have a purpose. You have a purpose in His kingdom. So figure out who you're going to pour into this year. Now, let's pause for just a second, and then we'll wrap it up. Imagine what this next year, okay? Just imagine for a second. In fact, wherever you are, unless you're driving, if you're driving, don't close your eyes. But wherever you are, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to imagine your life 1 year from now, okay? It's 2024. December 31st, we are reevaluating what this past year was like, right? Okay, I want you to put yourself a year into the future. How different would your life look if you set some personal finish lines? How different would your life look this year? What could it look like if you set some personal finish lines and you took the Apostle Paul's advice and you ran the race as if there was an actual prize? How different would your life look? Not only that, how different would your relationships look? How different would your relationship with your Heavenly Father look? If you started this year by setting a goal that you want to read through the Bible in a year, you want to pray 5 minutes every day, or you want to have an intimate relationship with Him, imagine what your life would look like in an entire year. of that. Now, imagine what would happen if an entire church took these words of Paul seriously. I mean, imagine what would happen if, as an entire church, we just took these two application points. We all set personal goal lines, and then after that, we poured into somebody else. I mean, Paul did it. He found Timothy. I mean, imagine what we could do as a church in this city if we did it. But it can only be done if we do it together. And I know you want to. I want to. And I can't wait to see what 2024 is going to bring us. This past year has been absolutely amazing for our church. And I can't wait to see what God's going to do through us in 2024. So, let me ask you this. What would the kingdom of heaven look like if all the believers started to do this? Look pretty amazing, wouldn't it? So, that I would love to pray for you. Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for this word that you gave the Apostle Paul today that is ever so relevant to our life. God, thank you that you've taken this time to call our attention to maybe the complacency or the lackadaisical attitude that we have towards different things in life. God, that maybe it's time for us to slow down for a second and actually set a goal line in our life. Set long term, and then also set maybe one for this coming year, Lord. So, Father, I just want to thank you and praise you for this. But Holy Spirit, I pray that you would empower us. I pray that you would strengthen us and you'd give us the resolve to sit down and actually do this exercise, to sit down and take the Apostle Paul's words seriously, to strive and run the race as if to get the prize, not simply to be on the track, but to get the prize. So help us do that. Help us do that as a church. Lord, thank you. Thank you for 2023. Thank you for the blessings you poured out on each of us individually. Thank you for the blessings that you poured out on this amazing church. And Lord, for 2024, we want to start with our hands open, our hearts open, our eyes and our ears open, saying, Lord, take every part of us and use it to glorify you in 2024. Lord, we love you. We give you all the praise. And everyone said, amen. I will see you guys next week. We love you.